The morning after the incident, Rachel walked into the precinct with heavy eyes. She hadn't slept much, replaying the night's chaos in her mind. At her side, David followed quietly, his dog trotting close. He had insisted on staying near her after what had happened, but as soon as they stepped inside, the room fell silent. Officers turned their heads, whispering, their eyes narrowing at the sight of a homeless man in ragged clothes standing among them. Rachel felt the judgment in the air, but she kept her chin high, determined to defend her unlikely ally. Captain Morris, a grizzled man with a stern face, wasted no time. "Rachel," he barked, "my office, now." She hesitated, glancing at David. "He comes with me," she said firmly. The captain scowled, clearly disapproving, but motioned them inside. Once the door closed, his voice dropped into a growl. "What the hell is going on? You bring a street hobo into my precinct like he's one of us? Are you out of your mind?" Rachel took a breath, ready for the storm. David stood silent, his eyes cast downward, but his presence spoke volumes. Rachel explained everything, how David had spotted the danger, how he'd saved her life by acting faster than anyone else. But the captain wasn't impressed. "Or maybe," he said slowly, "he's part of it. Maybe he knew where to be because he was working with them." The accusation hung in the air like a knife. David looked up sharply, his eyes flashing with hurt. "I risked everything for her," he said quietly. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with insult. Rachel clenched her fists. "Captain, you're wrong. He's not the enemy." The captain leaned back, studying David. "People don't just end up on the streets by accident. You've got a past, son, and I don't know what island. Until I do, you're a liability." Rachel's face hardened. "If he's a liability, so am I, because I trust him." The room went silent again. The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, but one misstep, one hint he's playing us, and both of you are done. Do I make myself clear?" Rachel nodded, but David said nothing. He only lowered his eyes again, ashamed of being doubted once more. Later that day, Rachel sat at her desk while David lingered nearby. Whispers traveled like wildfire among the officers. "Why's he here? Probably casing the place." Rachel's gone soft. Every word cut David deeper, though he tried to hide it. His dog pressed close against his leg, sensing his unease. Rachel finally looked up at him. "Ignore them," she said softly. He gave a bitter laugh. "I've been ignored my whole life, but this is worse. They don't just look past me. They look at me like I'm poison." His words broke something in her. As if to prove the skeptics right, news of a burglary arrived. It had happened just blocks away from where David used to sleep on the streets. The evidence was thin, but it was enough for suspicions to boil over. An officer named Daniels stormed up to Rachel's desk. "Convenient, isn't it?" he sneered. "Ever since your pet hobo showed up, crime seems to follow." Rachel jumped to her feet. "Say that again," she snapped. Daniel smirked. "What? That maybe he's not a hero but just another criminal?" David's fists clenched, but he stayed silent. That night, Rachel walked David back to the alley where he usually slept. For the first time, she noticed how little he had: a torn blanket, a dented tin cup, and the wall he leaned against for shelter. She turned to him. "Tell me the truth, David. Did you ever do something you regret? Something that would make them think you're guilty?" He hesitated, then sat down heavily. "I regret a lot, but I never hurt anyone. I lost jobs, lost family, lost myself, but I've never been a criminal." His voice cracked, and she believed him. The next day, Rachel couldn't shake the unease. She went to check the surveillance footage of the burglary herself. Hours of grainy images passed until she froze. There on the tape was a shadowy figure breaking into the shop. But it wasn't David. The man was taller, broader, moving with a limp. Rachel's heart pounded. She ran the footage again, slower this time. The suspect's face was blurred, but something about him felt familiar, a scar across his jawline. She had seen him before, not on the streets, but in a police file. Meanwhile, David sat outside the station. His dog curled at his feet. Officers walked by, throwing him suspicious glances. He felt like a ghost present, but not welcomed. Then, out of nowhere, a hand landed on his shoulder. It was Daniel's. "Listen, Hobo," he hissed. "I don't know what game you're playing, but if Rachel gets burned because of you, I'll personally see you thrown in a cell. Got it?" David stared at him, calm but defiant. "You're blinded by your hate," he said. "One day you'll see I'm not your enemy." Rachel burst out of the station minutes later, clutching the footage. "David, I found something," she whispered urgently. He followed her to a quiet corner, where she showed him the blurry face. His jaw tightened. "I know that man," he muttered. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean?" David took a deep breath. "He used to live on the streets, like me, but he went darker. He started working for gangs. He tried to drag me into it years ago. I said no. That's why I ended up worse off, because I wouldn't cross that line." Rachel's mind raced. If David was telling the truth, then this was bigger than a burglary. This was connected to organized crime, and her own department might already be compromised. "We need proof," she said. David shook his head. "Proof won't be enough. You'll need courage, too. That man doesn't work alone." His dog barked once, as if to emphasize the warning. Rachel felt the weight of it. She knew he was right, but she also knew she couldn't take this fight on her own. For better or worse, she needed David. As the days passed, the tension only grew. Rachel's captain ordered her to distance herself from David. Daniels openly accused her of protecting a criminal, and all the while, the man from the footage lurked unseen, planning his next move. But every night, Rachel found herself seeking David out, listening to his stories, hearing about the man he used to be before the streets claimed him. Slowly, trust deepened, not just hers in him, but his in her. He had spent years unseen, unwanted. Now, someone finally believed him again. Then, one rainy evening, as Rachel walked home, a shadow moved behind her. A hand reached out. Before she could react, David's dog snarled, leaping forward. David was there in an instant, grabbing the attacker's arm. It was the man from the footage. The fight was brutal, fast, and ugly, but David held his ground. Finally, Rachel pulled her gun, ending the struggle. The man was arrested, but the damage was done. Rachel knew her colleagues would ask why David had been there again, always there when danger struck. Back at the precinct, Rachel faced the storm once more. The captain eyed her coldly. "So, your homeless friend just happens to be at the right place at the right time, again. Do you hear how that sounds?" Rachel's jaw clenched. "He saved me, again. Without him, I'd be in the hospital, or worse." The captain said nothing, only staring at David with suspicion. But Rachel noticed something new in David's eyes. Not shame, not hurt, but determination. He was tired of being doubted, tired of being silenced. Late that night, David sat with Rachel outside the station. Rain pattered on the pavement, his dog resting between them. "They'll never trust me," he said softly. Rachel turned to him. "Then we'll show them. We'll prove you're more than what they think." He gave her a small smile, one that almost looked like hope. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting not just for himself, but for someone who believed in him. And that fight was only just beginning. The morning after the scarred man's arrest, the precinct was buzzing. Officers exchanged uneasy glances as Rachel walked in, with David trailing behind her. The news had spread fast. The suspect had gang connections stretching across the city. But what unsettled everyone more was that he had called out David's name during interrogation. "He'll pay," the man had snarled. Rachel had been there, and she hadn't missed the way David's face tightened, as though he had expected it. Now, she could feel the entire department's suspicions weighing heavier than ever. Captain Morris summoned her immediately. His office smelled of stale coffee and tension. "Rachel," he began, his voice gravelly, "you've crossed a line. This isn't just about some hobo anymore. That man, your so-called ally, is connected to a dangerous gang. I want him out of your life, out of this building, today." Rachel clenched her fists. "Sir, David isn't the enemy. He's their target. That means we need him." The captain slammed his fist against the desk. "No, it means he's a liability I can't afford. Get rid of him or I'll do it myself." Outside the office, David sat with his dog, watching officers pass by. Their eyes lingered, filled with suspicion and disdain. When Rachel stepped out, her face was pale. "They don't want me here anymore," David said quietly. She hesitated before answering. "They think you're connected. They don't see what I see." His lips curled into a bitter smile. "They never do." His dog nudged his leg, as if urging him to stay strong. Rachel touched his arm gently. "Don't give up. I won't let them push you away." That night, Rachel insisted on walking David back to the alley where he sometimes slept. They stood under the weak glow of a streetlight, the city humming faintly around them. "You don't belong here," she whispered. David gave a hollow laugh. "Where do I belong, Rachel? I'm too dirty for the rich, too clean for the gangs, too broken for everyone else." His words cut deep. She wanted to argue, to tell him he wasn't broken. But before she could, a shadow moved across the alley, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Rachel's instincts kicked in instantly. She pulled her gun, aiming toward the darkness. David's dog growled, teeth bared. From the shadows, two men stepped forward, their leather jackets marked with the same insignia she had seen in the file the gang tied to the scarred man. "We've been looking for you," one sneered, pointing at David. "Our boss doesn't like traitors." David stepped forward, shielding Rachel instinctively. "I'm not one of you. Never was." The man laughed coldly. "Doesn't matter. You're as good as dead." The air grew heavier. The fight erupted fast. One man lunged with a knife, but David's dog leapt forward, snapping at his arm, throwing him off balance. Rachel fired a warning shot, sending sparks off the alley wall. The second man swung a chain, nearly catching David across the face. David ducked, his fists moving with surprising precision. Rachel caught a glimpse he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting like a man who'd once known discipline, who had training buried beneath years of street life. The realization struck her hard, but there was no time to dwell. Finally, the gang members retreated, one clutching a bleeding arm, the other snarling threats. "This isn't over," he spat, disappearing into the night. Rachel lowered her gun slowly, her heart still racing. David stood panting, his dog growling low. "They'll be back," he said grimly. She stepped closer. "Then we'll be ready." For the first time, she noticed how close they stood, how his eyes weren't just filled with fear anymore, but with something deeper, determination mixed with wariness. It was the look of a man who had carried too many battles alone. The next day, Rachel confronted the captain with the truth. "They're targeting him," she insisted. "You push him away. You'll hand him to them. Is that what you want?" Captain Morris shook his head. "Rachel, you're blinded. You don't even know who he really islanded, where he came from." She slammed a file on his desk, the evidence from the burglary footage. "I know he's not a criminal. I know he's risked his life for me more than once, and I know we won't stop that gang without him." The captain's silence said everything. Meanwhile, David sat alone in the break room, feeling out of place among the uniforms and clean tables. His dog lay at his feet, eyes half closed but alert. A younger officer walked in, sneering. "What's next? We give you a badge too?" David didn't rise to the bait. He only stroked his dog's fur and whispered, "We don't need badges to do the right thing." The officer scoffed and left, but Rachel, who had overheard from the doorway, felt a pang in her chest. This man had nothing, yet still clung to principles most had long abandoned. That evening, Rachel and David sat on the station's rooftop, overlooking the city lights. "You fought like a soldier," she said finally. David's eyes darkened. "Once. A long time ago, before I lost it all." Rachel leaned closer. "That's why they fear you, isn't it? Because you walked away?" He nodded, his voice low. "They wanted me. I refused. They punished me. Took everything. That's how I ended up here." His words hung heavy in the air. Rachel reached for his hand, and for once, he didn't pull away. But danger was far from over. The gang wasn't just after David anymore. By dawn, messages began flooding the precinct. Cryptic warnings, graffiti tagged on walls near Rachel's apartment, and photos left on her car. One showed her standing with David, circled in red ink. Another showed her home. Her blood ran cold. "They're not just targeting you," she told David, voice shaking. "They're targeting me too." He stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we faced them together." His dog barked once, sharp and clear, like a promise. Captain Morris finally gave in. He called them both into his office. "I don't like this," he growled. "But I can't deny the gang is moving faster than we are. If you want to use him, fine. But understand this. If you fail, it's both your heads." Rachel nodded firmly. David said nothing, only straightened his posture. For the first time, the captain saw something in him beyond rags and dirt, a quiet strength that unsettled him. Perhaps this man wasn't just a liability. Perhaps he was a weapon waiting to be aimed. That night, Rachel and David prepared for what lay ahead. They spread files across her table, marking gang hideouts, cross-referencing names. Her apartment was small but warm, a stark contrast to the cold alleys David knew. As his dog curled on the rug, Rachel looked at him. "Why do you keep fighting, David? After everything?" He paused, staring at the flickering lamp. "Because if I stop, then they win, and I can't let them win." His answer was simple, but it carried the weight of years of survival. Rachel felt a spark of admiration and something more. The following evening, they set out together. The plan was risky. Infiltrate one of the gang's warehouses, gather proof, and expose the network. Rachel disguised herself. David relied on his street knowledge, and the dog acted as their silent guardian. As they moved through the shadows, David whispered directions only someone who had lived on the margins could know. Rachel realized just how much the streets had sharpened him, turned him into a guide no officer could ever be. In the silence, a bond grew stronger than she expected. Inside the warehouse, they found more than they bargained for. Crates filled with weapons, documents detailing bribes to officials, and lists of names officers included. Rachel's blood went cold. "They've infiltrated the department," she whispered. David clenched his fists. "That's why they hate me. I know too much." Suddenly, voices echoed. The gang had returned. Rachel and David ducked behind a stack of crates, their hearts pounding. His dog growled low, ready to defend. Rachel gripped her gun, but David placed a hand over hers. "Not yet. We wait." The minutes crawled by as gang members moved closer. Rachel's breath caught, her mind racing. David leaned close, whispering, "Trust me." Then, with a sudden motion, he tossed a metal can across the floor. It clattered loudly, drawing the gang's attention. While they turned, he guided Rachel and the dog through a back exit. They escaped into the night, adrenaline surging. Outside, Rachel turned to him. "How did you know that would work?" He smirked faintly. "Survival teaches you tricks no academy ever will." For the first time, she laughed, despite the danger. Back at the precinct, Rachel laid out the evidence. The captain's face turned ashen as he saw the names of officers tied to the gang. This could destroy us," he muttered. Rachel stood tall. "Or it could clean us." But even as she spoke, she knew the fight wasn't over. The gang wouldn't stop until they silenced David, and now her too. For Rachel, this was no longer just about justice. It was about survival, loyalty, and a man she never expected to trust. As dawn broke, David stood outside, the city stretching before him. His dog pressed close, warm against his leg. Rachel joined him, her hair damp from the morning mist. "We made it through the night," she said softly. He nodded. "But the war's just beginning." She met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, neither felt alone. The streets had shaped him into a ghost. She had dragged him back into the light. Together, they weren't just fighting crime. They were fighting to prove that even the forgotten had a place in this world. The night felt heavier than usual. Rachel and David both sensed it. A storm was coming, and not the kind that brought rain. The gang had been humiliated twice, and men like that didn't forgive. David walked the streets with his dog at his side, Rachel beside him, each of them glancing over their shoulders. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. "They're going to make a move tonight," David muttered. Rachel tightened her grip on her jacket. "Then we'll be ready. Together." But deep down, both wondered if they truly were. The attack came faster than expected. A black van screeched to a halt outside Rachel's apartment. Before she could react, masked men poured out, guns flashing. David shoved her to the ground just as bullets tore into the brick wall behind them. His dog barked furiously, lunging at the nearest man, forcing him back. Rachel rolled, drawing her weapon and firing, hitting one attacker in the leg. But they were outnumbered. For every one they pushed back, two more appeared. David grabbed Rachel's hand. "We can't fight them all. We have to move." They ran through the alleyways, hearts pounding, the sound of boots and shouts echoing behind them. David's dog stayed close, weaving through shadows with uncanny loyalty. Rachel fired behind her to slow the pursuit, but David knew it wouldn't last. "They want me," he gasped. "I'll draw them off." Rachel stopped in her tracks, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare. We finish this together." For a moment, the chaos faded, replaced by something raw and unspoken. Then the gang turned the corner, and the chase began again. At last, they burst into the warehouse district. David stumbled to a halt, chest heaving. "This is it," he said, pointing to a familiar building, the same warehouse where they had uncovered the files. "They'll come for us here, but maybe we can turn it against them." Rachel frowned. "You've thought about this?" David nodded grimly. "Survival means knowing every trap, even the ones that kill." His dog whined softly, as if sensing what lay ahead. Rachel squared her shoulders. "Then let's set the stage." Together, they prepared for the final stand. Inside the warehouse, shadows stretched long across the floor. David moved swiftly, stacking crates, setting loose objects where they could be used as distractions. Rachel checked her gun, loading the last bullets she had left. "Not much," she admitted. David found a length of pipe and gripped it tightly. "Enough." They exchanged a glance, not fear, not doubt, but silent agreement. The dog sat near the entrance, growling low, ready to alert them. The sound of engines outside grew louder. They didn't have to wait long. The final battle had arrived. The doors burst open. Dozens of men poured in, led by the scarred man himself, free, furious, and hungry for blood. "You should have stayed forgotten," he snarled, pointing at David. "Now you die with her." David stepped forward, pipe in hand, his voice steady. "Not tonight." The clash was immediate. Rachel fired, taking down 2 attackers. David swung with brutal precision, his years on the street turning into raw survival instinct. His dog leapt into the fray, snapping and tearing, forcing the men back. Chaos consumed the warehouse. Rachel fought like she had never fought before. Every shot was deliberate, every movement driven by adrenaline and the need to protect. Beside her, David was relentless, his blows fueled not by rage but by sheer will. For the first time, Rachel saw the soldier he had once been. The scarred man pushed through the fight, locking eyes with David. "You don't belong here," he growled. David tightened his grip on the pipe. "Neither do you." They charged at each other, and the warehouse seemed to shrink around them. The fight between David and the scarred man was brutal, hand to hand, no mercy. Blows landed heavy, bones cracked, blood spilled. Rachel tried to help, but gunfire pinned her down. David's dog lunged, biting into the scarred man's arm, giving David the opening he needed. With a roar, David swung the pipe, knocking his enemy to the ground. The scarred man sneered, blood dripping from his mouth. "Kill me then. Be one of us." David dropped the pipe, shaking his head. "No. That's why I'll always beat you." He turned away. But the scarred man wasn't done. With a sudden surge, he pulled a hidden knife and lunged. Rachel screamed a warning, but David's dog reacted first, slamming into the attacker with everything it had. The knife plunged harmlessly into the floor. Rachel fired her last bullet, and the scarred man collapsed, motionless. Silence filled the warehouse, broken only by their ragged breathing. David dropped to his knees, pulling the dog into his arms. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. Rachel knelt beside him, tears in her eyes. "It's over." Dawn broke as police sirens wailed in the distance. Reinforcements stormed the warehouse, arresting the surviving gang members. Captain Morris entered, his expression grim until he saw Rachel and David standing side by side. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded. "You did what we couldn't. You finished it." Rachel looked at David, who stood covered in dirt and blood, but still standing tall. For once, there was no suspicion in the captain's eyes, only respect. "You saved lives tonight," he said quietly. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. Weeks later, the city began to heal. The gang's grip had been broken, their leaders dismantled, their corruption exposed. Rachel was hailed as a hero, but she always corrected them. "I wasn't alone," she'd say. David refused recognition, slipping back into the shadows, his dog always by his side. But his absence was felt, whispered in precinct halls. To some, he was still a hobo. To others, he had become something greater, a guardian no one expected. For Rachel, he was simply David, the man who refused to give up. One evening, Rachel found him again, sitting on the same curb where they first met. His dog lay at his feet, tail wagging faintly. She sat beside him, the city lights painting their faces. "You could have had a new life," she said softly. "Why stay out here?" David smiled faintly. "Because out here, I see everything, and someone has to watch." Rachel leaned against him, letting the silence stretch. For once, it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Together, they stared at the city they had saved broken, but still alive.